Hello, this is a short video for business students in higher education who are conducting a literature review for a business project. This is all about thinking critically, and it would apply to other disciplines other than business. It's just about critical thinking and critical analysis of any literature that you find. Let's have a look. PROMPT is a nice simple acronym which really helps you understand what you're being critical about. What kind of things? For example, the provenance, where your literature is coming from. So if you found a particular article, particular textbook, but very especially a website, then where's it come from? Is there a particular bias or agenda in that source? And how relevant is it to your business study? We've all spent hours and hours reading stuff which turns out to be only marginally relevant or not relevant at all. Try and find ways to check the relevance quickly, and I'll show you a way in a moment. Objectivity. How balanced is your literature source? Does it have arguments for and against, or is it just pushing one side of the argument? You want it to be a good resource, it's got to be objective. The method. How did the author decide that this was important? Really rather vital that we understand whether what is written in this source is based on research, a big research study, for example, or a small qualitative study, how reliable it is, how generalizable it is. What is the evidence? That's where we're trying to get to. How do we warrant the claims that it makes? And understanding the methodology, which should be in there, it should tell you how they got their results, then that will help you critique the source. Presentation is also important. If something is very difficult to follow, difficult to read, then quite honestly, I wouldn't spend too much time on it unless you've been specifically asked to look at this source. Because good academic writing should be clear, should be simple. And finally, timeliness. Normally, we ask students in business to focus on texts which are usually around the last 5 years, because things change so fast in business. However, it may be really important to go back to much, much earlier texts if they're seminal pieces of work. In other words, lots of people use them as the basis for their thinking. You can soon find out if something is seminal as you start to search for literature. If you find one article or one author who is regularly cited, quoted and discussed, then you've hit a seminal article, and it's fine if that's much, much older. So that's PROMPT. What about when you're writing critically? Now, this is suggesting that any critical writing, but particularly a literature review, should begin with an introduction and the context of your research study and why you've searched for that particular literature. Then it needs to put forward an argument. Now that will be perhaps a collection of ideas or a sequence of ideas that you think are relevant to your research study. Your argument will be based on the evidence you found from the literature. That's really important. And so you will pull together literature sources that back a particular point of view. But it doesn't stop there. You should also think of a counter-argument. So, suppose the ideas that I'm putting across are to do with the fact that the World Wide Web has made information systems in business much simpler to do. Okay, you've found a load of sources that say that sort of thing and give details or examples or cases. But we need a counter-argument. Can we imagine an argument which said, well, actually, the World Wide Web is quite a danger or a potential high risk for business information systems? I think you could find quite a bit of evidence to support that counter-argument. So put the counter-argument, support that with evidence, and then, if it's appropriate, refute your counter-argument if your first argument is stronger, or if the counter-argument is valid, then you need to incorporate those ideas into your own argument. I've talked a lot about arguments. All I mean is writing in sequence about a series of ideas that you've found in the literature which relate to your research project. Always make sure that every argument or every claim that you make in your writing is supported by evidence. That's why we need to reference a lot of literature sources and always come to a conclusion in your critical writing. Now the questions you can see here, 12 questions, are taken from Professor Tom Borner, who works for the Brighton Business School. He's an emeritus professor, and he came up with these questions some time ago, and I find them really helpful. Just have a look at some of them. It's not that you have to answer these questions for every piece of reading you do. It's just that they can stimulate the kind of critical thinking you need to apply. You need to look for assumptions and challenge them, anything taken for granted. You need to look for logic in the reasoning of what you're reading and find whether there's sound evidence for claims that are being made. Look for agendas. Are there any particular interests served by what's being said in the literature? Are there particular values which underpin the reasoning? Not a bad thing, but we need to understand what they are and explain them, make them explicit. Are there any implications of the conclusions which are not in your piece of literature, especially when you put it together with other pieces around the same idea and topic? Is the terminology clear? Is the language clear? Can we take the findings in this piece of literature and actually come to quite different conclusions? Is there anything off the agenda? What's the context? Very often people make quite big claims for things, ideas, models, tools, and actually they've only investigated them in a very specific context. Take, for example, the original Hofstede discussion about cultural diversity. It was originally done within one company, IBM, which was global. It was a very, very big study, so quantitatively it was excellent. But that initial study was only done within one company, which meant that generalising it became a bit problematic. Since then, he's done much more research, and so have others, to broaden out and rethink some of those conclusions. So some questions to help you think critically. Don't forget, we do want to be constructively critical, not negative. We simply want to be sceptical about the knowledge that we're reading. It's not always as obvious or as true as it might first appear. Scrutinise the arguments, look for the logic, but be open-minded, because you might be reading something which clashes with your own point of view. Don't just dismiss it. Be willing to be convinced if the scrutiny stands up. And try to be constructive. You're pulling together a lot of bits of evidence, a lot of literature by other people. We need to understand whether it's valid and worthwhile, whether it's accurate, whether it's logical and reasoned, and supported by evidence. But ultimately we have to pull it together in a constructive way. So we're not going to generally conclude that there's no literature out there on our topic, or that all the literature is biased because XYZ. You need to be quite constructive in the way you handle people's work. It's being respectful to them. When we're making an argument, and here I'm drawing on a great book by Mike Wallace and Alison Ray, who talked about writing for postgraduates. They're talking about conclusions, the conclusions that you write being claims to knowledge. And all claims or assertions must be warranted. They need to be backed up. Hence why we do a literature review. Hence why we do research. And here are the ways you can back it up. Draw on the evidence. The same book, this is Wallace and Ray again, actually offers 5 critical synopsis questions. And if you find the 12 Borner questions perhaps a little heavy or complex, then stick to these 5 because they're great and simple. Ideally, if you find no problem in thinking or writing critically, then go ahead and do it. But if you do have difficulty with writing critically or thinking critically about your reading, then try using these 5 questions in a regular way. Always try to make notes by answering these 5 questions. The first one might seem a bit obvious, but actually, if you're very clear that you're reading something for a particular purpose, to answer a particular issue you're trying to investigate, for example, then that's a way of constantly making sure you stick to what's relevant. What are the authors trying to do? You're looking for an agenda, possible values and bias. What are they saying that's really relevant to what I want to find out? That might be just parts of the reading, not just all of it. How convincing is it? Well, is it a logical argument? Is there an objective, balanced argument? And is there evidence for all claims? And then finally, how and where are you going to use this in your writing? Good luck with being critical.